Hello and thank you for stopping by. Today I'm working on this leaf blower, this Little Wonder leaf blower. It has a 5 horsepower Briggs Stratton engine, and this is one of those older models that have the Pulsa jet carburetor. I'm going to show you how I clean out this carburetor. When I bought this was a purchase I made off Facebook. Normally you see these things for free. Now with the fall season there isn't anyone giving them away. The ad read that it runs like a beast. When I went to pick it up, it wouldn't start. The owner got it started by spraying some carburetor cleaner in here, and she started right up. The blower was working really strong. There was a lot of force coming out of the blower end of it, but for 2 days I tried starting this, and the best I got was just now what you saw in the video, that it sputtered. First time I did that in days. If you noticed, when it did run, you had a screeching in here. So besides working on this carburetor, I'm going to have to take this cowling off to see what's wrong with the starter. It might be something loose in there. It might be that it threw a couple of bearings. I'm not sure. So to get started, I'm going to put this up on the trailer to make it easy to work on. And I'm going to be removing this carburetor. And hopefully this tank isn't full of rust. Problem with these old tanks, they rusted up pretty bad. And that could be causing a problem with this no start, hard start situation. So let's get started. All right, looking this over, this is what we have. You have to remove this air cleaner. Got a new air cleaner out of it. Looks like a fairly new plug also. Once you have this air cleaner off, you get this carburetor off. I was looking it over. There's a couple of ways we can go. I want to take this tank off because I want to see what the inside of this tank looks like. It's about a half a tank of gas in there. And from what I can see, the camera could pick any of that up. I have to get a light in there. You really can't see anything. It looks like it's okay, and it's not pitted on the outside. So I believe this tank will be okay. I don't believe I have to clean out this tank. First of all, the way this is set up, you have these 2 screws that hold the carburetor intake to the engine. Then you have 1, 2, 3 screws holding the carburetor onto the tank. Now the last one of these I did, I believe it had 4 screws, but it was a little different setup. And to get this tank off, it looks like there's only 1 screw back here, 1 bolt holding it on. I don't see anything in between here holding it. So what's holding this tank on is the carburetor itself and that 1 bolt. So what I'll do, I just might drain this tank, might just siphon it out to see what that gas looks like. And see, the problem with taking the carburetor off like this is there's a long pickup tube on the inside of this carburetor. And let me see here. This is from a Briggs Stratton manual. The pickup tube goes all the way down into the tank, almost to the bottom. My concern is that when I go to wiggle this off, I don't want to snap that tube. This unit has to be every bit of 20 years old, but I will try taking the carburetor off, leaving the tank on. Now to get this carburetor off, like I said, there's those 3 screws. Plus I'm going to have to remove this screw here. You see this screw, when you move the throttle, it controls the throttle, and I believe the governor down on this end. So I'll have to take this screw out, and let's see, I have to disassemble this piece over here. I'll be able to remove this tube when I remove that screw. Now here's the kicker. These screws back here, there isn't any way I know of to get these screws out, unless maybe I take this muffler off and I can use a wrench on this. And the only way to get a wrench on here, a thin one, is to remove this muffler. I'm not doing a restoration on here, otherwise I would remove the muffler. But you never know when these bolts are going to stick and maybe even break off into the block, and that's another can of worms I don't want to get into right now. And what I did to loosen them up was to go into the side slots that the screw has, and it turns fairly easy. You can see the angle that I'm at. Anyway, I'm going to disassemble this carburetor from the engine, from the gas tank, and I'll show you what it looks like and what it has to be done. To get these two top screws out, this one I could get a wrench on and turn part way and flip the wrench. This one down here, I found it easier to use a long screwdriver to get into the slots that are on the side of the screw and turning it that way. Hey, this is taking more time than I wanted it to. I'm thinking it might have been better just leaving it and hitting it with some carburetor spray. And I had to start it. Well, I started it. I gotta finish it. Oh, there we go. I think I got it now. Okay. I'm gonna get this screw out, this screw out. Like I mentioned before, I'm going to remove these screws, remove this piece here. You got to be careful not to bend any of the linkages when I get this out. Once I have this off, we'll take a look at this carburetor. I got the carburetor out, and I'm trying to get a view of the inside of this tank, and the camera's just not picking it up. For those of you that aren't familiar with this type of setup, this doesn't have a float bowl in it. The way it works, the carburetor pulls fuel up through this tube and it goes into this little well over here, and from this well it gets pulled up through this smaller tube over here, and inside over here there's ports that allow the gas, the overflow gas, to go right back into the tank. So the way this works is that the gas is constantly pumping through. This over here does look like it has some kind of debris in it. Yep, it's stuck to the bottom. This is what's in that tank. Looks like I'm gonna have to pull this tank off and clean it out anyway. But for now, I'm concentrating on the carburetor. We have these tubes, and you gotta be careful not to snap this tube. And another thing, sometimes these tubes, they'll have a crack in them. If there's a crack in this tube, it's going to be sucking air in and it's not going to run right. So you got to be careful, and if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe they sell these any longer. It does look like the same size as a brake line though. But anyway, the gasket on this looks okay. Here's where the fuel pump is. I'm going to clean the outside of this off, then I'm going to open this up and see what this pump looks like. I'm going to spray in all these ports. I believe this would be the high-speed screw. It's hard to explain and do this while I'm videoing it. But I'm going to turn the screw in, count how many times it was turned in. This way, when I go to put it back, that's where I'm going to start at. I knew it ran with it in this position. Once I have this cleaned up, I'll be back to show you as I'm taking it apart. I cleaned the outside of the carburetor with a toothbrush and some old gas. This is gas that I pulled out of a tractor, but the complaint was my tractor won't start. Take a look as to why. Anyway, I used this gas to clean the outside of this carburetor. I want to point out, on the top of this carburetor, this connects it to the throttle, to the choke, and if the camera's picking it up, there's a tiny spring. Watch, you want to make sure you don't stretch that spring out. Put this in here, we don't want to lose anything. So the first thing I'm going to is this adjusting screw. I already pulled it out. So before removing this screw, I counted how many turns it took to reach bottom. It took one turn and then a quarter turn about that high. Then there was this nut that screw goes through, a washer, and I already started taking this out. This is the main jet. When you go to take this out, you want to make sure you get a screwdriver that's wide enough. And this one happened to be a little on the loose side. Sometimes they're in there pretty tight. Okay, here we go. See if we can see through here. Well, now this is clear. I don't know if the camera's picking up. I can see right through. There isn't any blockage in here at all. And this tip was in good shape also. There wasn't any debris on this tip. Now I'm going to go to the other side where the pump is. And let's put these in here. The way this ran, when he got it started, it was running strong. So I don't expect to find too much into the carburetor. But I'm going to be using this leaf blower, and I'd rather do what I have to now. So once I start using it, I don't have to play around with it. Under here will be similar to if you ever taken the chainsaw apart, the way that pump works. All right. There we go. Okay, we got a little gasket here. We don't want to rip anything. And we're not looking good here. Just want to point out you have this collar and you have the spring. When you put this collar in, the concave side goes down to hold the spring. It goes in like that. And I don't know if I should mess with this or just leave it alone. I might regret this. Oh, there we go. Okay, and this is your pump. Now if you had to change anything on this, sometimes the springs go, but it would be this piece right here. And I might have a problem here. I do have a problem. I hate to put this back together and it not work. These get stiff sometimes, especially with the ethanol gas, but this is pliable. Other than me ripping it, this is in good shape. I'm going to look to see if I have another one of these. So the next thing for me to do is clean out all the ports with carburetor cleaner. I'm not going to show it out on camera. I don't want to splash onto the lens. And then I'm going to reassemble this. And then the next thing I'll be going for is this tank. There's one bolt I showed earlier that's holding this tank onto the engine. This bolt here. Now the bracket for this tank also has the throttle cable coming to it, and we have this spring connected down below. Okay, should be able to pull this away. Oh, and it has the kill switch on also. So for now, I'm going to put this camera down, empty this tank. We'll see what this gas looks like, and I'll see if I get a better view on the inside of this tank. This tank doesn't look bad on the inside. I don't think the camera's picking this up, but it doesn't look bad at all. A little bit of debris that was up in here, I'll be able to get that out. Now the fella that sold it to me is a second owner, and he said he takes care of his equipment, and from what I've seen of this carburetor, the inside of it looked fairly clean. And you can see this gas here, this is some kind of stabilizer he has in here. I don't see any debris in this gallon jug. Hey, a good reason to drink wine. You get these gallon jugs that you can check your gas with. Let's see here. I don't see anything in there. I don't see anything floating around. So I don't know how that little bit got up in there. Who knows? You know, for all this debris on the outside of the tank and everything, that little bit that's in there isn't bad at all. I'm going to rinse this out in here, get that out, spray this down, clean the outside over here. Hopefully I won't be looking at this part again. And I'm going to be taking the scouring off because we have to take care of that screeching noise to see what that's all about. Well, now I know why we had all that screeching. Here's one of the bearings. It goes into that piece there. This piece should be screwed on. Should be two little screws that hold this piece on. And here's where the problem is. There's the rest of them. Okay. I'm gonna have to put this camera down and let's see what we can find here. It's been a while since I had to play with one of these, but this is the way the starter works. You have these little bearings, and when you pull the cord, those bearings will jam up into these slots. They'll rest in here, and when you pull the starter cord, it pulls it. That's what turns your engine over. Now, this thing came apart. To get this off, you would hit it the opposite direction, and this whole piece will spin off. My question is, why did it come apart? Let's see. What we have to do is get these bearings in, well, before I lose them. Wait. Well, at least we have them all. None of them are missing. Not yet, anyway. Oh, no, wait. I am missing one. No, there we go. Put this back together and see if I can find a couple of screws to attach this. We'll see. I flipped this blower on its face to make this easier to work on. Looking at the starter mechanism, I can see that some of these slots are pretty worn, and I'm assuming what happened was, being that it's worn, that one of these balls might have popped out and pushed this cover out. I'm not sure if that's what happened or not, but anyway, they're in there. They're greased up a little bit. I have grease on the shaft that this went on. This goes back down. Got to tap that on, and now this has to go on, but the screws for this were missing. The screw has to go here and the screw has to go there. All right, before I put this all together, I just want to point out a few things. I don't know if what I did is going to help it start any better or not. The carburetor looked like it was clean all the way through. I didn't find any blockage, but in this section of the gas tank right here, this part that replaces the float valve, that doesn't come off. You can see that on the bottom. It's embedded in there. I'm trying to show it. There we go. But what I did find, remember earlier I mentioned that there's ports when the gas flows up and out. It's constantly flowing through and there's little ports going through. Could you see my finger over here? Maybe not. Right in here, there's an opening where when the overflow of gas fills this up and goes back in. Well, when I get my finger in there, that's where the rust is. The tank itself, I poured gas in a couple of times and flushed it out. I didn't get anything out of that, but right up here is where the problem is. And this is where any blockage that we're going to have is going to come from. I'm going to clean this out the best I could. Another thing, when I got this back on, the camera went out on me before. I'm not sure if I showed it or not. This gets tapped on. I tapped this on with a hammer all the way around, and this needed 2 screws. And the 2 screws I used were actually from the zone valves that I replaced in another video. That's up above if you want to see that one. So sometimes it pays to be a little hoarder. Whenever I come across some screws that are large, small, doesn't matter the size, but something that I don't run across often, I save them. Never know when you're going to use them. And this just happened to be just last week, so that worked out well. The benefit of everything I did so far was getting this together, because that wouldn't have lasted much longer. Mechanism on the inside, it would only be a short period of time before that was just completely stripped out and it wouldn't work. I have to see if I find one of the old lawnmowers that have this on here and pull it out, because at some point I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to change this. But by spraying a little carburetor cleaner in here, it freed up the wheel, and I put a little bit of oil in there to lubricate it. You can see now this cord pulls all the way in, and it pulls back all the way. Whether it's a lawnmower, leaf blower, anything that has a recoil like this, every so often it wouldn't hurt to pull this off and put a little bit of oil in there, clean it up. You have that big spring that goes around in here. and all this stuff, it'll cake up in there and it'll keep it from pulling back. All right, I have this. All right, I have the starter. All right, I have the starter put back together and mounted back on. I have the gas tank and the carburetor mounted back on. I checked the service manual, and it says when you're removing this tank, to remove the tank and the carburetor all in one piece. That didn't look too feasible at the time, but when I put it back together, I put it back that way with the carburetor on the tank. I didn't have it mounted, but what I did have, I had this piece connected. Then I screwed this back in. I connected the throttle linkage. Then I tightened this bolt. The carburetor was loose on the tank, and this one bolt that's on the bottom here, holding the tank mounting plate, I left that off until I got these screws. When you put these screws in, don't forget the gasket that goes back. And this was painstaking. This was the hardest part, getting this screw in and this one back in. The way I went about it, this top one I was able to turn until it got tight. Once it got tight, I used those slots on the side to finish tightening it up. I couldn't get a wrench on here. This bottom one was a combination of using a screwdriver in the slot, and when I got to where it was tight, I was able to get this wrench on it and snug it down. Now, using the wrench or the screwdriver on this bottom one, the most I was able to turn it at any given time was 1/8 of a turn. Now, while I had this tank off, I drained the oil. This is what it looks like. Talk about dinosaur juice. When I drained the oil, I used this plug over here because of the way the trailer was tilted and the oil dripped to one side, getting into the container. On this other side, you do have another plug over here where you could drain the oil. Or if you have one of those vacuum pumps, you could just stick the nozzle in it there, pump it a few times, and you could drain it out that way. So now all that's left to do is to get some fresh oil in here, get that air filter back on, get some fresh gas in here, and see whether this was worth the effort. I have it gassed up, I have it oiled. The manual recommends to use 10W30 weight in the summertime and 5W30 in the winter. Normally on these machines, I always put a straight 30 weight in it, but I just happen to have this 5W30 from Napa. Been sitting on this for quite some time. A while back, Napa had a crazy sale on the oil. I forgot what I paid, but it was really low. And I picked up a case of 5W30 instead of the 5W20 that I needed, and I just didn't bring it back. And I've been sitting on it all this time, waiting for this machine. So let's get this off the trailer and see if it's going to start. Okay, here we go. Well, that's a go. Not having one of these before, working on one before, I didn't know what to expect. But I was pretty surprised. I went down to the bottom of the driveway where the leaves are really thick. And whew, this little wonder blew it right up. Now these leaves have been sitting here for quite some time. Even the ones that were in the driveway, which were embedded into the gravel from driving on them, this blew it right up. If you have trees and you happen to come across one of these and you have some time and a little bit of patience, work on it. It'll be worth your time. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful, give it a like. If you have any questions or comments, post them down below. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe. Hit that Joe Z button. And be sure to ring that notification bell not to miss my new videos as I upload them. Until next time, stay warm and be safe.